Welcome, everyone. We have another talk story today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mary Conception, and I'm a lactation peer counselor at Open Arms. And in honor of World Doula Week, we're joined here with a couple awesome doulas from the community and the awesome Betty from the PI Health Board. So I'm just going to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves. And I will popcorn it over to you, Vanessa.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here. So I am a doula for Daybreak Star Doulas, and we are a full spectrum doula organization. And our program is under the umbrella of the United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. And we are thankfully fully funded by Best Starts for Kids, with King County levy, which will be up for a vote again, I think in August. So make sure you vote yes for that if we're King County voters, so we can keep doing the work we do. So so what I mean by full spectrum, that means the reproductive spectrum. So not only do we care for families for birth, postpartum, lactation, but also potential pregnancy loss or abortion care. All our relatives need care, and we do that for them. A little bit about me. Is this the time?
Yeah.
So I've been a doula since 2017. Almost 4 years now. And in that time, I worked private practice, but mostly I did a lot of birth work for Open Arms, which is another wonderful nonprofit that Seattle area gets to take advantage of. It's a wonderful program. But I'm just so happy to be working with the United Indians in our program. We're busy. So basically our program requirements, no income requirements, but the pregnant person has to be living in or birthing in King County, and self-identify as Native American, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. And we are happy to serve you. So we actually have a Facebook group, a Facebook page. You can contact us through there, and we can do an intake. Cami Goldhammer is our wonderful project manager, and she does all the intakes, and she'll match you with one of our team members. Yeah,
that's awesome. Thank you. And Stevie, can you introduce yourself and your organization?
Yes, thank you for having me. So I'm going to start with, my name is Stevie Merino. I'm Chamorro. I am Familia Mesa and a part of the Dodo clan. So Sana Maasi for having me. I am a doula located in Long Beach, California, and I am the co-founder and creator of the Birth Workers of Color Collective. Through this collective, we have a doula training where we train people of color to become doulas and to do birth work. And really, they're not being trained to become doulas. Generally, they already are, right? Or they already, have that within them. And we're just sort of giving them a place to be able to have a foundation that's rooted in their own lineage and traditions. And also in being a person of color living in Turtle Island or so-called United States, right? And also that is founded on political, social justice, advocacy, activism, and very much does not shy away from those things. And so our collective trains people from all over the country, as well as other international folks who have attended. And essentially, we provide services for people of color and birthing families and pregnant families through all pregnancy outcomes. For myself, I am a birth worker, a lactation. My phone will probably continue to go off because I'm always being reached out about all the things. But I am also a lactation professional. I am a trainer, a speaker, and I'm also in anthropology. I'm in academia. And I'm on the American Anthropology Association leadership as a gender equity chair. A lot of my research in academia focuses on the birth experiences and traditions of Pacific Islanders living in diaspora of Southern California, and specifically on Chamorros in Southern California. I also do a lot of conference presentations on birth workers of color and our experiences and disparities that we face, particularly during this pandemic, which has been very interesting, which I think most of us are aware of and have had interesting experiences just in general. So that's the long, short version of who I am, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We're all so excited to have you both. And Betty, can you, I'm sure many of us are familiar with you, but I mean, I'd love to hear more about you.
Mary, I'm one of the outreach coordinators at the Pacific Islander Health Board, and I'm really excited to do these monthly talk stories with Mary. I just had, I just had my 3-month-old. So my daughter is now 3 months old. So hearing how there are services for people from our cultures makes me feel so good. She's my second child, so I just wish I was more informed during my first birth. And so now when I see or come across people who are working for our population, I just want to spread the word so hard about these services that we have, especially the services here in Seattle with the Pacific Islander Health Board's partnering agencies like Open Arms, which Mary, you're from, and Vanessa, I guess I'm really excited that you're there and at Daybreak, and so you can speak on both organizations. And yeah, COVID has really taken a lot of the health board's attention with the pandemic, but we also want to try to get back into doing prenatal outreach and postpartum support and lactation support this year, and try to juggle both of the needs of our community because they're both very, very important.
It is. And what I love about us all coming together is that there are people advocating for our communities, and it's just so important to have, and so important that we're spreading these resources out and letting people know about what's available in our community and for us, especially in birth work. And I know that prior to coming to Open Arms, I'd heard about doulas, but it was always kind of elusive. It was like a little mysterious, and so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So can you tell us about what a doula is and what services doulas provide? I can popcorn it. Stevie, if you want to start that discussion.
Sure. So, there's a textbook answer to that question. And so I'll start with the textbook answer, not necessarily my definition, but essentially it's a person who supports someone, a pregnant or birthing person via physical support, emotional support, educational support, etc. And most commonly it's known for birth and labor support. So pain management and that sort of thing. For myself, when I think of a doula, doula is a problematic word. So I use the word birth worker generally. I use doula to market because that's what people know, but doula was a Greek word that essentially meant servant or slave in Greek. So obviously for people of color, it's super problematic, has a lot of weight and, you know, not a very good association. So a lot of people are really moving away from that term. But for me, my doula work looks like what my clients need. So sometimes that looks like advocacy in hospitals. Sometimes that looks like giving them a space to practice their ceremonial or traditional practices. So like for, you know, Pacific Islanders that I work with, there's a lot of like incorporating different things that have been commodified, right? Like coconut oil, even the ocean in some ways has been commodified, right? And so it really depends on my clients, but essentially helping them through this process as like a resource, as support, as education, and, you know, just sort of making it as much of the experience as they envision as possible, also knowing that we live in a system where obviously we can't promise any of these things, right? Trauma is really real, not just our own trauma and experiences, but generational trauma, right? And so a lot of my work also really touches into that sometimes in labor, birth, stuff comes up that isn't ours, right? And like, how do we support someone through that? And that sounds very like, you know, woo woo, but it's a very real thing. Like there's so much research that shows that we carry trauma in our body and we carry history in our body, right? And all of those sort of things. And so essentially that's what doula work looks like for me. And it also is not just the person, right? I think when we think of doulas, we think of, oh, we support the person who's pregnant. For me, that's a very white Eurocentric idea. Because coming from a Pacific Islander background, I know that the aunts, the grandmas, the family, the community, like if they're not on Team Stevie, then it's just going to be an uphill battle. Right. And so supporting the entire family unit and community is really what that looks like, which is kind of ironic because a lot of doula spaces are like, oh, we're just creating agency for our clients. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But also we're not individual people. Right.
That's true.
Right. We're very much in a group. Vanessa, do you have anything to add to that? I know you mentioned that you're a full spectrum doula and Daybreak Star offers full spectrum doula services. So what does that look like on the other end, you know? Because we do often think about like labor and delivery and afterwards, but there's just so much, there's a wider spectrum of that. So what does that look like?
I mean,
okay, there we go.
Thank you, Stevie, for that intro and that perfect textbook answer. Team Daybreak Star Doulas, like we like to call ourselves like aunties, you know. We're trying to do this photo shoot, and there's this sweatshirt out there that says "Big Auntie Love." Two out of 4 of us have that sweatshirt, but the other 2 need to get it so we can take this group photo, because that's how we feel, like we're aunties, you know, and we come in and just kind of help out, like what Stevie said. Like for me, you know, we were talking a little bit before we started the live presentation, but you know, all sorts of different people get matched, right? Like as far as like, oh, if you think, oh, I'm this type of personality and I wouldn't be a good doula. We really like the term birth keeper, so we use that a lot in our spaces, birth keepers. But yeah, so you know, Cammie would do an intake of a pregnant person, and she gets to know them a little bit, and she pretty much knows, oh, so and so would be the perfect doula for you, and so would probably not be the perfect doula for you, you know. So our personalities as a team, and when we doula as a team, like we kind of help each other, you know, so all our energies kind of combine to help each family, you know. So that's really neat to have that kind of in a group. And I had that similar experience at Open Arms in our little team there. You know, we kind of like, I can't do this work solo, you know. I don't know how many times I've called one of my colleagues, you know, driving home from the hospital, usually from the hospital, just needing to like get this out because of what I see, you know. And how many times those conversations saved me from quitting this work. Because like Stevie mentioned, like we carry a lot, we see a lot. And it is so important that we do this work in community. And so having mentors or whatever you want to call them, ates, you know, to just know that you can, I tell people, like, if it's in the middle of the night, call me. You know, I'm on call all the time anyway, so I'm used to getting calls in the middle of the night. Just because, and, you know, do a good soak, do smudge, do some kind of something, ceremony to retain that, you know, that spirit that we hold so we can keep doing this work. Yeah, and I love serving folks, you know, in their fertility journeys, having that that space to navigate that with queer families. You know, my wife and I, you know, our oldest is 10. You know, so I have some lived experience with that fertility journey and navigating these spaces that, you know, are generally not hostile, but not welcoming either, you know, and supporting people in abortion care. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, not a lot of places are allowing support for abortion care, like during the procedure. So that means I come over when they get home. And I start, you know, fussing in the kitchen and making them some soup. So soups is like warming foods, like those are foods to heal. Just had this great conversation with a newer doula about cooking soups for postpartum families. It's like, I was telling her, and she was like, "Oh, do you have recipes?" And I was like, "Well, kind of. I mean, I just." I mean, I kind of wing it. Like, no. So, like in the Filipino tradition, there's like the babaylans, right? So they're like the spiritual leader of their community, and I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of part witch, and I just kind of throw in my juju in there, and just like, let's heal that uterus, you know, still flowing. And so that's what I do in my practice, and I think even now, you know, when we have mostly all our prenatal appointments and childbirth education all virtual, you know, we're kind of limiting in-person support until birth and postpartum. And even in postpartum, it's not as much as we would be able to offer because, you know, we want to minimize, you know, risk exposure. So we're limiting to like immediate lactation needs. You know, we'll do a home visit, and just like that first coming home experience and being like, oh my gosh, we have a baby, and we, you know, what do we do? And just that, Betty, I know you're nodding because it's still fresh.
Yes.
And of course, when you said that your baby's 3 months old, first thing I thought, like, right? I'm like, I hope she had a doula.
I actually did. I talked too much, so I won't share my experience, but I'll say it was a great experience, and I had a VBAC. And I'm a tiny person. Zoom makes me look average height all the time. And so right away, even in my first pregnancy, my mom was like, so when are you going to schedule your C-section? I was like, I didn't even think of a C-section yet. And so the second pregnancy, I was like, I just needed 1 centimeter last time. And Thanks to Open Arms, I actually was able to secure doula right before, and I gave birth a week early. So that, like, it was short notice. She was there right when it was happening. And I don't think women or new mothers understand how much a doula can really change your birthing experience. And so both of them are different. And even after a second kid coming home, I was like, okay, what do we do again? It's only been 4 years, but also what do we do again?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear you got support. Yes, VBACs. I just want to like climb a hill and just be like, yes, I'm so happy. I'm so happy. And yeah, those narratives of like that people receive in these Western medical, scenarios where they look at you, and in my head, I'm like saying, our bodies generally make our babies that we can birth, generally speaking. So yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is countering that narrative, like, well, let's look at it this way, and Stevie did talk a little bit about autonomy, and I wanted to speak to that. Like when I started this work, like it is about body autonomy and body sovereignty and the reclaiming of that. But more importantly, it's like I think about each birth we attend, each pregnant person we care for, it's a healing of our communities. And yeah, and it's just spreading the word. It's so important. But yeah, so if like there's somebody in community that's listening to this, and it's like, oh, I had my baby, but boy, some lactation support would probably be, call Mary up, call us up, we'll figure something out and we'll get someone to you, it's just so important to reach out.
It is, yeah. And I loved, so one of our next questions is, touching on the benefits of having a doula. And I liked how you touched on, Vanessa, how you mentioned COVID, because things are definitely a lot different. And so I guess now presently with COVID, and this is a twofold question, I suppose, since the circumstances are a little different, but what are the benefits of having a doula, let's say, before COVID, in person and remote? It's
am I muted? I can't tell.
You're good.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. First of all, yes. Right now, as I said, there are some clinics, particularly for DNCs, they are not even allowing like a spouse or family member. It's just the person and the nurse. But for birth, most of the hospitals in the area are allowing support person plus doula. And it's been changing, like I just heard this one hospital kind of changed a little bit. And so you basically have to call ahead and post on the various Facebook groups, birthkeeper Facebook groups, like, oh, what have you been experiencing? So just to do some little research, because even if your client asks their provider, like sometimes they don't have the real answer. They think one thing, but the hospital has other policies. So just getting clear on that is really important to help families feel secure and knowing what to expect, but yeah, for the most part, I'm able to go to doctor's visits, ultrasounds, and basically this is what I do, Mary. I just kind of show up and we don't say anything unless someone says something, you know what I mean? Just to like kind of that play dumb sometimes works. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I see you, Lydia. I love you too. I'm so glad you're with us. Lydia's is one of our colleagues in United Indians.
Oh,
But she does good work with the Pacific Island Health Board in the state of Washington.
Stevie, how is it in California? Are there like more restrictions, or is it pretty much similar to what Vanessa was saying, about having a support person and a doula?
Yeah, so Southern California and California in general is a very interesting state, I think. One, we're very large, and everyone just sort of, it's kind of like the wild, wild west, right? We're different cities, even if they're like right next to each other, act on their own accord in some ways. So throughout the pandemic, there's been a lot of shifts. Like in the beginning, it was like no support people, no spouse, no one. And some hospitals have allowed like a family member or spouse just recently. And others are now starting to allow doulas. And there's been a lot of advocacy, right? So a lot of us have been advocating to make sure that doulas are not seen as visitors, but as essential workers, because that's another thing, right? Why so many of us practice within like our cultural or sort of like people of color groups, because a lot of the mainstream doula organizations were pretty much encouraging people to do virtual support only, and weren't really trying to advocate or having a firm line. And for my clients, especially, people of color, especially single parents, especially people who maybe had Medi-Cal and all of these sort of different situations, they didn't need virtual support. They needed that in-person advocacy and support. And so it kind of showed the difference of like seeing doulas as a privilege and seeing doulas as a necessity, right? And so I think COVID really highlighted, one, the fact that these major organizations aren't really here for regular people, right? And two, that we're so much more essential than this idea maybe that people had before. Because I think there are a lot of benefits, even pre-COVID. I think COVID has created its own sort of interesting and unique dynamics. But before, like, we know research has shown that doulas can decrease the rate of interventions, can increase the rate of positive birth experiences, of postpartum just experiences on the full spectrum, whether that be abortion, a live birth, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are a lot of potential benefits. That's not to say that doulas are like these magical sort of beings, right? Because I think that there is a problem that some doulas do promise these sort of outcomes. And we can't ever promise those things. I've supported many losses, especially during COVID, where it's very unexpected and obviously very tragic. And it's just like, yes, we can support people, we can show up, we can educate, we can do all of these things, but we can't say what's to happen, right? And so even in situations where like I've had to advocate to get into hospitals during COVID, obviously that's traumatic and heavy for my clients to have to experience while they're in labor. And that's sort of something out of our control, but we're going to do what we can to support them having the experience, or as close to it as they envision. So I think there are definite potential benefits pre-COVID, during COVID, and hopefully post-COVID, if there is a post-COVID.
Right. This might be the new normal, just different layers of different phases of turning back to society. I mean, you mentioned magical beings. I think that doulas are magical beings. You all hold so much and just advocate and take so much care and take on and assist the birthing parent or the birthing people so much. How can one get a doula when they are pregnant? Is it because I know that when I was having, I didn't even hear about doulas until way after I had my children, and it was because a friend happened to be one at the time. So, how do you get a doula? How can you have a wonderful birth with a doula? And are doulas covered under insurance, or is that something that is specific with each provider or each organization?
Well, we're trying. Oh, sorry, Steve. Do you want to go? There is a doulas for all initiative happening at state level, Washington state level, where there's a coalition of wonderful people trying to advocate for funding for Medicare, and that's our state insurance, or basic state insurance. And I'm really excited for that. I know a lot of folks in Open Arms and Cami Goldhammer, our program manager, they're doing all of that kind of footwork, right? But even the reimbursement of what they're proposing, what's on the table right now, in my humble opinion, it's not sustainable, particularly for our BIPOC siblings. Like, I want this work to be, yes, it's not, yeah, thank you, Jacqueline. It's not a privilege. It's our heritage. It's what we've always done in Indigenous communities. We rally around our pregnant people and our lactating people, and we just take care of each other. And it is. So yeah, they're doing that. But really, currently, in the past, when I've had private practice clients, what I've done, what I know they've been able to do, is basically use their, what is it called, HCA, their like a over-the-counter medication, that fund, right? Like, I provide them a receipt and they can get reimbursed. I find that funny. I'm like Tylenol. And that seemed to work for them. But like, how many folks have jobs that provide that kind of benefit, right? That's all I know that people can do in our area, is as far as insurance goes. But yeah, there are programs like Open Arms and Daybreaks Are Doulas, and what's the other one? Global Perinatal Services. We have these agencies, these nonprofits that we can serve. So yeah, if you fall in that category and you're watching, we're here. Reach out to us. I think I answered the question. Ask around too. So we have that page, Families of Color Seattle, and I love how people are asking on that community page. There are some folks, and somebody was saying, oh, I already have a doula, and they say, oh, through Open Arms, and I'm just like cheering inside, that people are using these services now that we're doing all of these Facebook Lives, and these organizations are being known.
It is. It's great. Yeah. And then as more people are getting doulas, then the word spreads, and I'm hearing about doulas a lot more now, which is great, because it's wonderful to have that advocate and support there, especially for our BIPOC communities. Stevie, how is one able to get a doula in California? Is it through the same organizations? Is there
Yeah. I mean, not even just California specific, but I think a lot of ways that people find doulas is by word of mouth or research, and it's definitely individual clients, right? So people will for myself, they'll message me, email me, contact me, and basically we'll have a consultation, see if we're a good fit, and then hire me if they choose to. One of the complicated things I think with doing it that way is obviously the cost. Now, specifically BIPOC people are generally the ones who do a lot of volunteer and free labor. For our training, for myself, I want to completely do away with that. I think that it's an extension of we already do too much work, and that we should be valued for the work that we do, and there should be an exchange, and also sustainability, right? And it's interesting because I have this conversation with a lot of other Indigenous folks and BIPOC folks who are just like, well, traditionally, that goes against like traditional practices because like healers and birth workers in the past and in our ancestral line or whatever weren't paid for their services. And I'm like, yeah, well, one, capitalism was not the sort of, in control of the means of production and the way that we function. And also those people, those healers, those birth workers or whatever, they were cared for by the community. They were valued by the community. Them and their families didn't need for anything. And until that's the space that we also occupy, we need to function. I have a 6-year-old who's super bougie and needs to eat, right? And so like all of these things, so when people say those sort of things, I will counter it and say like, I mean, yeah, but also this is why people burn out. This is why like there aren't many BIPOC birth workers, because it's this constant cycle of I want to serve my community, but also there's not a sustainable way to do it. And so the way that it's sustainable for me is that I have my fee and, it's on the higher end, whatever that means. And those people who are able to pay that amount essentially offset the cost of those who are sliding scale. And that's what has worked for me. Everyone has their own sort of process. And then from our collective, which we have doulas all over, we essentially pay collective dues, which can be anywhere from 0 to however much. And all of that money goes in to basically fund whoever needs to do free or sliding scale services. So if someone reaches out and is like, I need a doula, I can't pay, then we as a collective would pay our doulas to essentially have a monetary exchange, right? Because like even for instance on Guam, I would talk to a lot of people about like the pateras, the midwives, and like the healers. And it was like there was some sort of exchange, whether that be like a rooster or taking care of whatever or herbs, there was something. And so that's kind of what it looks like. There's a lot of talks about insurance and Medi-Cal and all those sort of things getting involved. We've seen different states do it. And, like was mentioned, the reimbursement is not sustainable. It's actually a joke. And so in California specifically, we've used these other states as examples of one, you have to be trained by specific organizations, which are generally white-led mainstream doula organizations that that have a scope of practice that essentially says that you do not advocate, you do not do all of these sort of things, which is essentially anti-everything that most of us do. And also most of those people are not serving the communities that would actually need to use insurance or Medi-Cal or whatever it may be. So a lot of BIPOC organizations in California have made sure that we're a part of those conversations. That one, you do not need to be certified through these organizations to be seen as a legitimate doula. And two, that reimbursements need to be a lot higher in order for them to make sense and for it to be a sustainable, we don't just do this for fun, this is our livelihood sort of standard.
Yeah, and that brings us to another point. How did you get into doula work? I know that Stevie, I know that you mentioned you're an anthropologist. Did that come before the doula work or after? Was it
I was not interested in anything birth related. I knew about sexual education, obviously, and how people get pregnant, but literally anyone who was pregnant or was talking about birth, I was like, stay away from me. This isn't going to rub off on me. And so I was very uninterested. I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to be in academia. That was like my life path. And then I became pregnant. And And I had a lot of, I grew up super poor. I was on, like welfare, my parents. And so I had Medi-Cal and all these sort of things. So my experiences with the medical industrial complex were horrible and were very much rooted in like trauma and all sorts of things. So I knew as an activist that I needed someone to advocate for me. And, growing up in Long Beach is supposed to be one of the most diverse cities in the United States. And I could not find a doula, one that was Pacific Islander, who was queer, who, just like sort of was able to understand where I was coming from and what I needed, which was wild to me being in such a diverse city. And I ended up, having a doula, and I had a horrible birth experience. It was super traumatic. I pushed for 6 hours, which is not what you're supposed to do. No one should have allowed me. I like it. It's the thought of that still is just like, but during those hours of pushing, I had to kick a nurse out while I'm pushing. I had to advocate for myself while I had my partner at the time who was there, while I had a support team, while I had a doula. Right. And so all of those things were like, here's me who's college educated, who has all this support, who was married at the time, et cetera, et cetera. And this is my experience. Imagine people who don't have any of these things, or whatever the case, right? And what their experiences are looking like. And so I really felt like my years of advocacy, my years in education, my years in research, like all of it was preparing me for this journey. Essentially, like it was my Juliana, right? Like it was my sort of path. And once I got into it, literally 2 months after I gave birth to my now 6-year-old, who's actually 6 on Saturday, I found a doula of color training in the Bay. I attended with my 3-month-old in tow, or 2-month-old, and the rest is sort of history. And it was a fast moving train ever since. It was kind of like a, when you're in your calling, when you're in like what you're supposed to be doing, like your path is illuminated. And it's cheesy to say, people talk about like, my kid changed my life. And I'm like, no, my kid literally changed my trajectory. I mean, also changed my life in other ways, but the profession, literally everything I do is related to this work. And so I'm grateful to be able to, now have a training and to sort of see like the vision of what I needed and what I know so many other people need come into fruition. And to have the foundation that is rooted on like indigenous ideals, right? And rooted in community, because I think that we can't separate birth or pregnancy or postpartum from that. And that's what we've seen.
Yes, that's very true. We're seeing it pieced out instead of a holistic view. And happy birthday to your little one. Happy early birthday to your little one. Or not so little. I don't know. You're so right about once you have your path, or once you find it, it's illuminated, and it's just everything lines up to get you going on that. And I know with a lot of the BIPOC birth workers that I've met, it's because we didn't have that representation or that person there for us. And because of that, that's what got us into the work. Vanessa, was your experience similar, in becoming a doula, or, what got you on this path?
Yeah, it's funny. We did talk about this in another Facebook Live months ago. I feel like our listeners, if they come back, like, oh, she already told that story. Well, our older kid is 10 now, and we were in California at this time, and my wife and I always knew we were gonna have a family, and we researched all sorts of different ways we can create this family. But my wife had a real calling. She wanted to be pregnant and make our baby and birth our baby. So I went into like like research mode. Okay. And I read all the books, and that's how I learned about doulas, you know. We took a couple of different childbirth ed classes, and this is, you know, Oakland, Berkeley, so we had all of that. You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful place then. It's a wonderful place now. So yeah, so we're like, let's get a doula, and just in my like Vanessa way fashion, like I did all this research, and our budget was, you know, not great. But there were enough that I researched. I found a few to interview. So most people, when they interview folks, they interview maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Well, I scheduled 10 in this like Saturday, Sunday period. See, I'm like, you know, crazy parent mode, even before the baby is in utero. But yeah, we found a lovely woman, Indigenous woman, and she was, we ended up paying her a little more than what she was asking, because she was an angel. She was that just, she rooted us, you know. And I remember we birthed at Kaiser, Oakland on Piedmont Avenue there. And I remember my wife just holding on to her, and she kept saying, you know, just breathe into the earth and let you, you know, just like stay connected, basically, you know. And it's true, like she was our doula, not just my wife's doula. Like she took care of both of us. She'd look at me and she said, you go, you haven't gone to the bathroom in a long time, go pee, you know. You're gonna fall over, drink something, you know, like, and like really she was like the first example. Her name was Tanya.
Oh, I think we lost you. The audio. Oh no. Sorry, Vanessa, we're having trouble hearing you. I don't mean to cut you off, but okay. All right. Well, actually, you both talked about, I mean, we've talked about how representation matters and it's essential for our communities. And I know that the PI Health Board is having a doula training. And Betty, I wonder if you would talk about that, or if you'd like to talk about that.
Sure. I am really enjoying Stevie and Vanessa's experience, because I'm sitting here, I'm like, I want to be a doula. And I think I shared it before we went on. And my sister is like, I don't think you should be. but it's because even mentioning it to other cousins who are expecting this year, there's either not enough education that they are aware of, or it's just like a term that is never used around. And now also going forward, I'm learning every time we do a talk story, I'm learning so much about the profession, or just the birthing world in general. So I think I'm going to try to use the word birth worker more often than using the word doula. So I'm excited, and I'm sorry, my daughter is also here. So Ariella, can you please turn that off? This is real life though, and I feel like it's inevitable during the COVID pandemic era. We're working from home and stuff. So we are excited that this summer we're going to provide scholarship opportunities for our communities to enter into this profession and help train community members in doula work and birthing work. And I'm just going to pull this up. It is with the I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted with the show that she's watching right now. So it's with one of our partnering organizations. FISA is leading it, and she is with Global Prenatal Services. So this means when we say it in our community, I feel like, you know, we're talking about, when we talk about, you guys have talked about people generalizing our population. We at the Pacific Islander Health Board are really about like specifically each community, your island might be different. You might be within an hour or two of flights from each other, but you're completely different in your approach and your cultural expectations. So we're really looking to help each island leader who's interested in birthwork get their training that they need from the organizations that we work with that really heavily focus on BIPOC populations and our communities. And so that'll be this summer, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. And then also just connecting with Vanessa and Stevie with the work that you guys do, and building on this collective and the training and sharing information from what it's like in California and here in States. And I'm so happy that you brought up Guam, because oh my goodness, my grandma was that lady. Like, we never went to the hospital because we were always going to someone's house and bringing food. And that exchange is very important in the culture. And it doesn't have to be very, what's the word? Like, it doesn't have to be so fancy to show up with like a huge basket with a bow. It really is something that comes from the heart. But I'm going to put myself on mute for a second. And I wanted to ask before we left, or maybe Mary, you had another question. I think since we're talking about the training, I wanted to ask what does it say? What does doula training look like? How is it culturally informed training that you experience or you provide? Because I know Daybreak Stars, and I hope Vanessa comes back on in a moment, or Stevie with your work in California.
Yeah, so for our training, I try to, so we have a registration process, and we ask people how they identify, like what their backgrounds are. And so with that information, we try to find speakers and guest presenters that will be able to speak on those traditions or on those experiences, right? Obviously, no culture is a monolith, but I think it's important that people feel represented. For myself, like every day we open and close in ceremony. I always open with Chamorro chants, and how different people sort of bring in their own traditional practices, because I think it's also important to know that BIPOC people can also appropriate different traditional practices. And for myself, like, I very much know I'm an islander, so I'm not going to be practicing someone else's cultural practices, right, or traditions. And so that's how my training sort of approaches, making sure that we are being culturally relevant. But I think also like really encouraging folks and creating space, right? So like for myself, my family's from Guam and Puerto Rico. So essentially full on US owned, right? And what that brings is a lot of loss of traditions and practices. And so when we talk about culture, when we talk about traditions, when we talk about all these things, it can be very heavy for a lot of people. And so also holding space for folks, like when we're talking about, getting in touch with your elders or like the traditions in your background. Are we talking to people who have slaves in their ancestry, who are, descendants of war and colonialism and imperialism and continued sort of militarization and all these sort of things? And so I think like being responsible to each other comes with making sure that we're holding space for those nuances and experiences. I know for myself, like when I was doing my research for graduate school, talking to my family about what are our traditions, and everyone's saying, oh, it was to birth in hospitals. That's not a tradition, right? And so like the sort of heaviness and work that I had to do, and that a lot of my family members who at one point were like, that's not a real job, and now like are actually seeing me in this work, are finding it healing pieces of them, right? And so I think trainings have to also reflect that reality, that even as Indigenous people, even as BIPOC people, we all don't have access to our family stories, to our traditions, to our cultures, or to our elders in that way. And so what does it look like to still be in community and make those connections, while also holding space for all of that?
That's so beautiful. I'm learning so much and I'm loving this. Stevie, are your trainings like in person, or are they virtual right now, or are they on pause until,
Yeah, so they're virtual. We actually have a training coming up April 8th through 11th. Before they were in person, and so people would actually fly out or they would be local. One of the few positives of COVID is now, because it's virtual, more people from all over are able to attend. I've been in communication with a lot of Pacific Islanders on island, and I'm hoping to build scholarships and things for them to be able to take this training. And really whatever people feel like is the space that they belong, I think, to listen to intuition, right? Because that's yourself or your ancestors or whoever telling you that's the space you need to be. I highly encourage that, because I think a lot of times we get lost in the like popularity or in the social media trends, and don't always listen to like what our heart or our spirit is saying. And I think that's super important, which might not sound too business minded of me. But I think it's important, right? Because like we want to make sure that we're a good fit, that it's a good fit for us, and that we're a good fit for each other. And so I think we're all relearning what community looks like and how to be in community. Because even though we come from communal people, like we've lost a lot of that. And so I think training should also reflect that and feel good, ideally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it might be just a different type of business model, right? Because we're incorporating our, I guess, our culture into it, which is very different from the dominant culture. Welcome back, Vanessa. Before we go, I wanted to give you some space because I know you got cut off with the audio, but I wanted to give you some space to continue with what you were saying, because I know it was a great story.
Yeah, my silly story. Yeah, so we had a wonderful doula, and it was always in the back of my mind, like, wow, like that opening that Stevie was talking about, like something's happening here. And then it was like my aunties and my uncles and my mom, like, oh, but the real job, like you have a career. And so I had to push it aside, because I wasn't ready to make that leap. And years later, I felt the call to become pregnant and have our second baby. And again, we found a doula. She was wonderful, white woman. I wish I knew about Open Arms, because you guys they were around then, but I didn't know. We were new to Seattle. But that wasn't another life changer, So again, that little voice, like my ancestors were telling me, like, there's something here. But again, I pushed it aside. And 2017, something shifted, and it was time to make that change. And I did my training at Bastyr, which is again one of the mainstream white-centered doula training places, and they were great. I learned, it got me started. And immediately I got connected to all the places that that have helped me grow. I'm thankful for their teachings. But yeah, I think it is important to find your way into these like safer BIPOC spaces, right? Like I like the default of white space, like everything is white space, right? And our work is to counter that and to take more space, because we're here, we're still here, we're still having our babies, and we're going to continue to do that, and we're going to continue to feed our babies. So lactation is, I'm really passionate about. Colonization took that away from the islands where I'm indigenous to, right? Where it was like formula feeding was a thing, like it's American, it's the Western way, and I wasn't breastfed, And I say it all the time, like when we were breastfeeding my babies, like I will never forget the look my mom gave me as she watched us breastfeed our babies. And that longing, you know, like it was painful, but it was a rejoicing at the same time, you know, like full circle. And that's so healing. And I want to keep doing that, you know. So yeah, now I'm here. Now you can't get rid of me. I'll keep talking.
And we're so lucky. We're so lucky to have both of you, all of you in our communities and just in this space and working towards healing our communities, one baby, one family at a time. I could sit here and I could talk. I could listen to both of you talk for hours. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're at the 1 hour mark. God, I would really love to. So how can we find you? How can we connect with you? Where can we find you? I'll popcorn to Stevie. So Stevie, where can we find you and connect with you?
I mean, if you're in Long Beach, you can find me in the streets of Long Beach, in Southern California. But in the virtual world, my name has my Instagram handle, which is Soul and Roots Doula. That's also pretty much my website, my Gmail. And so those are the ways to connect with me. If you're a doula or interested in birth work, I think a lot of people are like, oh, you know, I don't want to bother people. Please bother me. This is basically the work that I do. And if you're pregnant or you're tomorrow and you're interested in more information, I have so much research and things that I do, and I love to have people to actually share it with. So that's how you can find me, and please find me.
And Vanessa, how can we find you and connect with you here?
So Daybreak Star Doulas is our Facebook page. So just go ahead and put that on our search. You can message us through there and, you know, leave us a way to contact you. Cami will do your intake. Oh, there's the school. It's the school calling me. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry about that. And I'm also on Instagram, Queer Brown Doula. And Daybreak Star Doulas is also on Instagram. So you can find us and follow us there. We're Cassandra, one of the doulas on our team. She does a great job with our social media. In fact, she's the only reason why I have an Instagram. She told me I had. So Queer Brown Doula is my IG handle, and Daybreak Star Doulas is our Facebook page. And if you Google Daybreak Star Doulas, you'll find us. We're on the United Indians of All Tribes Foundation website, and it has all our contact info there.
Thank you. And also, we on the PI Health Board website and Facebook, you'll find all these talk stories and other lives and discussions. So we can also find you through the PI Health Board. And yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking story with us. God, I've learned so much already, including the root of the word doula. And now, you know, I don't know if we're going to say that anymore, but
I want to.
Yeah. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for having
me. Thank you so much.
So good.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to follow you on Instagram now.
Thank you guys for joining us. So this is going to it's streaming on Facebook and in YouTube. I'm like Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So if you are, I think Stevie already mentioned how to connect with her, and Vanessa did as well. And if there are people in our communities who are expecting this year, please share this live with them. And if they're interested in birth work, that scholarships again are going to be available this summer for training with our partner organizations. That's it. Anything else to add, Mary? No. Oh, Happy World Doula Week. I
Happy
know World
World-
Doula Day was earlier this week, but thank you for all the work that you guys are doing for our communities.
Yes, thank you so much. It's so needed, so necessary.